I'm not in my basement library. It is a glorious April afternoon here in Virginia. I have to admit, it's a little warm, it's getting a little sticky, it's in the low 80s, but it's April. And just look at all that greenery behind me. I decided, why not do my wrap-up on my deck? Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am doing my reading report for all the books that I read from April 13th to April 20th. I am going to list these not in the order that I read them, but by format. I will start with my audio books. I finished The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper. This is the second in her Wolf's Den trilogy. The first of the trilogy, simply called The Wolf's Den, was a narrative about a daughter of a doctor in ancient Greece. The story started in 74 AD, and she was a prostitute in a brothel in Pompeii. If you know your history, in 79 AD, something really rather serious is going to happen to Pompeii. And it was a story of this young woman's fight for survival to raise above her situation as a prostitute. As I said, she used to be the daughter of a doctor, but things happened and she got sold as a concubine and later into slavery. Now, I really enjoyed The Wolf's Den. It was a little scant on some historical details, but I liked it. It was kind of women's fiction because it was talking about the strength of a woman rising above her situation. But I liked it enough to continue with the second in the book, The House with the Golden Door. I won't tell you too much about this story because it might spoil the end of The Wolf's Den. But it does talk quite succinctly about life in Pompeii. It was a little too long, especially compared with The Wolf's Den. It seems to me that she could have made these two books into one. The first book was 423 pages. The second was 474. And it just went on a little too long about the minutiae of women's lives. I know what the point the author is trying to make is. I just think it went on a little too long. And there is a third book in the series, The Temple of Fortuna. Even though I'm not as keen on The House with the Golden Door as I was with The Wolf's Den, I think I will continue with this series. I also think it'll probably be a little too long with all three books. The third book is like 343 pages, which brings the entire trilogy to 1,240 pages in length. It probably could have been condensed into one longer novel, about 600 pages. Now, I have not read the third one yet, so I don't know exactly, but it is fairly good historical fiction. For spring into adventure, I reread part of my favorite adventure series, and that is the Flashman series by George MacDonald Fraser. I have all the books in paperback, but I noticed that the audiobook was available from the library, and I needed something to listen to. So I listened to Flash for Freedom, the third in the Flashman series. Now, if you do not know the story of Harry Flashman, he is a rake, a scoundrel, a scamp. He's supposed to be a Victorian gentleman soldier. He really is not much of a gentleman, and he's rather a cowardly soldier who's more prone to run away quite vigorously than fight heroically. And Flashman has a way with the ladies. He has a way with languages. And in this book, he is rather coerced into a ship that turns out to be a slaver. Slavery was, of course, illegal in England at this point of time. It's about the 1840s, 1850s, somewhere around there, I don't remember. And Flashman first goes to the coast of Africa to pick up some illegal slaves, and then off to the United States to sell them. And let's just say some hijinks occur, and Flashman gets into a bit of trouble. He winds up running slaves for the underground, and he meets Abraham Lincoln. At this time, Abraham Lincoln was just a junior congressman. And it's really rather amusing how George MacDonald Fraser inserts historical characters into his novels. They do behave more or less as they would in real life. Abraham Lincoln came on rather forcefully at the end of this book, giving a speech. Now, it's not a speech that Abraham Lincoln ever would have given in real life, but it was enjoyable to see how this British man viewed Abraham Lincoln from the 70s, or the 1970s, in this historical novel. I cannot say highly enough how much I enjoy the Flashman series, and I really do have to continue reading them. I've read nearly all of them back in the 90s, so this is going to be a reread for me on the rest of the series. I think there's 2 books that I have not read in this series, and I'm kind of eager to get to them now. On my Kindle, I read a mystery novel from 1927, The Three Taps by Ronald A. Knox. The subtitle of this novel is A Detective Story Without a Moral. In this book, you were introduced to a detective of sorts. He is not a police detective. He is a detective for a big insurance company, just to verify claims when people want their money paid out. And in this story, there is an older man. He is about 62 years old. He goes to the insurance company claiming that he has a lethal disease, and he only has a few years to live. He has the premium insurance policy. It's called the euthanasia policy. And the idea is that if he dies before the age of 65, his heirs will get £500,000. That was a huge amount of money back then. But if he dies or does not die before 65, he gets a huge annuity paid out every year, so he can live the life of luxury. Now, this man is not necessarily poor. He's not extremely rich, but he's comfortable enough. And he decides that he wants to try to cancel this insurance policy. The insurance company goes, no dice. A couple of weeks later, the man turns out dead. He was in let's just say, a B&B out in rural England, and he died by gas poisoning. The police detective in the town says it was suicide. Now, part of the insurance policy says that if you die by suicide, the policy is canceled. However, the insurance detective thinks this might be murder. And then you go through your normal detective story. And lots of it is fairly traditional. The actual murderer is introduced early on in the story. And that was one of Ronald A Knox' rules for writing detective fiction. I'll link it back somewhere or talk about it later. But he wrote 10 rules for detective fiction. And one of them was that the murderer has to be introduced early in the story. A couple of the other rules are that you can only have one secret passage per book. I wonder how many books had more than one secret passage or secret room. Another thing was that you can't have twins in the story unless it's explicitly said up front that they are twins. I wonder how many detective stories back then used twins. Now, as a detective story, 3 taps worked pretty well. You were told it's either suicide or it's murder. But Ronald A. Knox pulls a corker in this story, a surprise. I kind of enjoyed it. Now, the only real issue that I had with this story is technical. He was talking about the gas taps in England in the early 20s or middle 20s, and that is just a subject that I don't know anything about. And it is critical to the solution of the story. I can recommend that people read it. It is now public domain. It is available from Project Gutenberg and standardebooks.org. I will leave a link in the description of this video, just in case anyone is interested to read this book from the golden age of mystery fiction. For my print book, I read Creakers by Edward Lee, a horror novel published in 1994. If you are not familiar with Edward Lee, he is a graphic, extreme horror writer. I guess he would be considered splatterpunk. And this novel does not fail to deliver the Edward Lee style of storytelling. There are so many graphic details of violence and sex and other sorts of mayhem that if you like your horror fiction really hardcore, you'll enjoy this. It feels so much like an Edward Lee novel, because of course he wrote it, but Edward Lee has a style that he likes, especially when he was writing in the 90s, where you essentially have some parallel stories and things are going on and they will eventually merge together. In this story, there is a disgraced police officer, presumably from Washington, D.C., who is forced to resign, and he ends up taking a job in his hometown of Creek City as a small-town police officer, working in tandem with the sheriff to find out who's bringing drugs into the town. And then there are the residents. There are these folk known as Creekers. They are mountain people known for inbreeding, but their inbreeding is really rather extreme. So as the police detective goes searching for these drug deals, the Creekers are mutants and they are up to something else. And the end of this book is just classic Edward Lee, because he ends a book the way a horror novel should. You are feeling this dread of the story and what happens to the characters. If you like extreme horror, read Edward Lee. I think this may be my first or maybe my second favorite Edward Lee story. The Big Head is its only other competition at the top slot. But you really have to prepare yourself for a graphics story where there are no holes barred. This was a buddy read with Bad is Rad 2. She enjoyed this book pretty much on the same lines that I did, ranking it very high in her preferences of Edward Lee novels too. Okay, that is what I read for last week. I hope you enjoyed the background scenery. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.